where something could be serviced, where it has been done more economically and where it's done more effectively and efficiently, that's where you should do those activities. And that's how you create international trade. But however, the playing field has never been fair in the concept of international trade. And that's where the developing countries have always been at an unfair advantage. Their biggest resource are their resources themselves, natural resources, raw materials. Raw materials have never had a good price in the international markets because the developed world have found ways to subjugate and to control prices of raw materials that come from the developing world. The Doha round of talks in the world trade, as you know, fell. They broke down. You can complain, it was, yes, it was a reason from the developing countries, and the developed countries of the world were not able to come to an agreement. You can put the blame on both sides of the equation, but at the same time, when you look at the playing field, you still have subsidies issues that are still being enacted by the Western world and in the developed countries of the world, which keep prices, which sort of do not help the developing countries of the world in the trade era, the trade arena, so that they can get a fair market price for their commodities. So that is a major issue, and that if we do not solve this problem, and if we do not come up with a fair trade system of the world, every one of us, whether you're from a developed world or from a developing world, we are all going to face a problem. Now, let me also raise, let me also raise, I think, so I want to focus, I don't know how you want to move forward.
No, I just wanted to bring, to tell our friends in these universities that you have to understand what is a subsidy. One of the telling things about a subsidy is that in Europe, which is an agricultural Western Europe, particularly France and Italy, and therefore, because it's agricultural, therefore it has a lot of livestock, and therefore it has a lot of cows. Every cow in Europe gets a subsidy of $2 a day for being a cow, which means that cows in France live better than 2 billion human beings in the world. And that's why my wife threatens me all the time with divorce, saying she'd rather go and be a cow in France than my wife, because she'd get a free gift every evening for no work. Just being a cow gets you money. So subsidies are a terrible concept. It's a gift to inefficiency. That is what a subsidy is. And once again, please note that the leader in the pack of subsidies is the United States, followed very closely by Japan, and followed in turn by Western Europe. Sorry, back to you.
Let me take it now. Let me just also address a couple of issues enacted, which is really affecting us today. And I don't need to tell you too much because all of you see it in the papers today. But really, the spillover in terms of the developing world. I think most of you must have read. I think it was last week, President Sarkozy of France made this comment to say that laissez-faire capitalism, as we know it today, is dead. And basically, unfettered free market systems are more or less dead. And that's a big issue. It's the economic model and the business model that many of us who've lived and who are in the Western world know about and understand, and we believe in as in a free market system. And it has also advanced to a certain extent many parts of the world. And economically, it's been very successful. But however, we've been living on borrowed time, because a lot of this unfettered capitalism, I don't want to get into a political discussion because then you get into a democratic republican issue of regulation and deregulation, so you've got to be careful of that. But let's be frank, it is an issue of unfettered deregulation. It is an issue of heavy credit, and where there was tremendous credit that was given and consumption, and there was a lack of savings in many of the advanced nations of the world. And as you know, in the United States, for example, we depend, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for 60% of our expenditures, we depend on foreign purchases of treasury bills. And as you know, if you look at China, has close to $1 trillion. I'm not sure if it's in dollar reserves or in treasury bills. So in a sense, you cannot live and survive where you're really captured by outsiders who are really buying. In a free market system, as long as it's helping each other, it's okay. But one day the reckoning time comes in, and we are now facing that reckoning time. And now the question is, how is it going to affect the rest of the world? And how is it going to affect especially the developing world? Because again, I want to connect this to the poverty issue. And coming back on the poverty issue is that, of course, at the end of the day, when there is less capital to go around, when there is less activity in terms of business, when every country, the advanced nations of the world who have been reasonably generous, but who need to be much more generous than they have been, have to start restricting their budgets, that's going to immediately affect the development assistance, as we call it in ODA. And that's going to have a tremendous issue in terms of how much money will flow in now to developing countries. The other is the whole issue of foreign direct investment. In a sense, what's happening right now, there is a sense of protectionism being setting in. You take, for example, the recent under the radar screen of a 25 billion subsidized loan given to the three major the major auto companies in the US to develop, more environmentally friendly vehicles. Now, if you say, if a government, it's a sort of socialism setting in within the United States that's coming in terms of, which means that if you look at the other parts of the world who are trying and who are ahead of the curve in trying to develop more environmentally friendly technologies, environmentally friendly modes of transportation, you are giving them a disadvantage because here you have an advanced nation who's now subsidizing the private sector in terms of moving forward. So the whole model in terms of how we've been functioning as a free market, how we've tried to move forward and we've been trying to give lessons to the rest of the world in moving forward on what a free market is and how capitalism should work and what democracy means, etc. And what is that we are now eroding what we've preached ourselves. And so the question is, in the developing world, they're asking, is your model the right model? Or what is the most appropriate model? And that is why you find more and more developing countries, to be fair, looking at China as an alternative model in terms of the model, in terms of how they are advancing and how they are bringing down people out of poverty. So we have, as a globe, we have to look at a whole changing dynamics that is happening in terms of how people look at fairness in the world. We may not agree to a lot of the things that happen in different parts of the world like China, but when you do not have food, clothing, shelter, you look at where other models are working and they're able to look after their populations in a better way. Yes, sir.
We have to open this up for questions from the universities, but one very quickly, I want to ask you, bring it back to the United States, because the United States is 1/3 of the economy of the world, and therefore it is a critical pillar of the world economy. And the question, it's going through a crisis. And my question as an American is, why should I bother about the rest of the world? I have a problem. I want to solve my own problems. To hell with the rest of the world. Charity begins at home. Why should I worry so much about poverty when my problem is the crisis at home?
Ambassador Kamal raises a very good point in terms of looking at the US. But let's start, why should the US not look after itself? Why the hell should it take care of the rest of the world? It has intrinsic problems of its own, and should it concentrate just on its own and forget the rest of the world? Let me start by saying, fundamentally, you have to take care of your population. It's a fundamental issue, because if you don't take care of your own population, you have a problem. But at the same time, you have to remember, and we all know, that the world of yesterday is finished. We are in an interconnected, globalized world today. What happens in Chernobyl, if they have a nuclear disaster, affects you and me wherever we could be in any part of the world. Today, a food crisis, and let me bring the issue of the food crisis issue. The food crisis issue or the energy crisis issue is affecting all of us, just because of the energy issue of greater demand for energy coming out of China, India. You have the need for more supplies of energy, and it directly affects energy consumption